You are very welcome to ask questions during the session and at the end of the session. If you would just use the reaction tools at the bottom of your menu to raise your hand so that we can see that you've got a question that you want to ask, or you can put your questions in the chat. And I'll watch that for you, Chief White, so that you're not having to monitor the chat. It can be hard to do that while you're talking. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Chief Chris White. Thanks so much for being here.
All right. Hey, everybody. So, Sarah, how do you want me to just go through the questions that you sent?
You can't, if you've got an order that you want to go in, that's fine. You can just
Not
kind of.
really. I mean,
Okay.
oh gosh, sorry.
You can disable chat G.
My phone decided to talk to me.
No, you're good.
Well, I'll just go down. I'll just kind of go down the list of what you sent to me first.
Sure, that's
And
great.
if anybody has any questions in between or after, whatever the case is, then we can dive into that too.
Perfect. It
So
would be, yeah,
go
if you
ahead.
can like kind of share the question before
Yep.
you answer, that'd be great.
So how does the mission of Campus Police Department align with the overall mission and values of Blue Ridge? So I've made notes for these questions, so I'm going to just kind of sort of read those and then we can go from there. So the mission of the PD is to provide a safe and secure environment to provide the greatest opportunity for a positive experience on campus, ranging from employees to visitors and everything in between. We strive to ensure everyone knows that we're here, not just for students and faculty, but anyone that's conducting any type of business on campus, whether it be just a visitor here checking out and walking around, or whether it be somebody that has an event. Education is the top priority for us. We're not here to cost people money, so to speak, i.e. writing tickets, taking people to jail, stuff like that. If that is a must, then it's a must, but that's not even close to being our top priority. We like to focus on educating people on the law or rules at the college if there's a violation or something like that. Or if it's just the best way to walk to your car at night so you don't become a victim. So everything in between, that's what we try to focus on. We don't, do people do bad things? Yes, of course they do. Do people make bad decisions? Yes, of course they do. But we try to get to the root underlying cause of that as opposed to just the whatever's happening itself, if that makes sense. Questions, concerns, comments, elaboration, anything on that one? I'm watching like 15 different things, so.
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. And I have no idea who asked these questions, so if it's your specific question, I won't know. Some of the key policies and protocols the department has in place to ensure safety, both physical and emotional. Are any of these policies new or particularly challenging at this time? Okay, so like I said, the department is committed to safety first without compromising the mission of the college. We changed our emergency response protocol from safe to run, hide, fight. Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Whenever I first came in. That was a little bit of a learning curve because it is somewhat different, but it's been implemented all over the college to include posters. Is it still in the shell of classes and all that stuff? So it's everywhere. So it shouldn't be new unless you're new to the college. As far as policies and procedures, I mean, our policies align with the college and the law. That's pretty much the basic of that. Let me see, physical and emotional, I mean, we have tons of training. We have training completely separate from the college every year on de-escalation techniques, legal updates, you name it. And we pretty much have a standard training on it every year. And as far as our officers go, we're in a little bit of a unique situation because I only have one officer that's new to law enforcement. All my other officers, including myself, have at least 15, if not 25, 30 years. So thousands upon thousands of hours of training, both physical training, and investigations, sexual assaults. It runs the gambit of everything. Let's see. As far as what's kind of new is we try to, I guess, I don't know if it's new to you guys, but we try to pre-plan for any predictable issue. For instance, Helene, 3 or 4 days before Helene, I was meeting with leadership to discuss what we were going to do, getting things in place for afterwards. And having been in Charleston for 8 years, I kind of knew what was coming. I didn't know it was going to be as bad as it was, but I knew that we were going to need some support in place prior to for the after. So Kirsten and HR, Kirsten on the student side, HR on the employee side, we had some things in place. Was it enough? Probably not, but is it ever enough? I mean, it's hard to predict everything, but some stuff was already in place. Some conversations were already being made. So that is both physical and the emotional side. HR sent out a bunch of things where they had some mental health sessions that were available to where employees could come talk if they wanted to, stuff like that. So that's the long and short of that answer. If there's any more y'all want to know or need or anything on that, let me know. We got anything down there, Sarah? Okay.
We're good.
Next, how does the department ensure accountability and transparency in day-to-day operations and during critical incidents? What are your communication protocols with faculty, staff, and students? Okay, so let's attack the first part. Transparency and accountability. If you've never talked to me, I'm about as transparent as I can be with everything. I mean, if you got a question, ask me and I'll give you as much of an answer as I possibly can without stepping over the line of what I can and cannot reveal. Law enforcement has a bunch of things that they do that they can't talk about, whether it be security, whether it be privacy, and being at the college with FERPA and everything else, it just adds on to that on top of what we're required to do. But as far as during a critical incident and communication, that is generally going to fall on Ben Rickert and the PIO. He will generally be doing the communication with pretty much everybody when it comes to some type of critical incident. I from time to time have sent out information and other things like the safety during the fires, stuff like that. But mostly it's going to come from Ben Rickert, being our PIO and our representative of the college. The same goes for students. That generally gets looked at by everyone that's way above me. And then it goes to Ben, of course, and then it will go to Kirsten or Sarah or somebody over in student services to send out to the students, because I don't have access to send all the student emails. Fair enough. Does that answer that somewhat?
I have a follow-up question on that. In
Sure.
terms of the Blue Ridge Alert, then, is that
Mhm.
something that who controls Blue Ridge Alert?
So Ben controls Blue Ridge Alert as far as sending out the alerts. The message is sometimes a pre-recorded message that we already have in the queue. Some are what we make up on the fly, depending on the situation, but it's always a joint effort with, depending on the situation, but they're the like emergency team. So it's a couple of VPs, Ben, Dr. Leatherwood, Chad, myself, Barry. And that ranges from, snow on the college to an active shooter or something like that. It would all come down to that. There are several people across campus that do have access to send the message. If for some reason Ben was incapacitated or I was, or Steve Young was, there are a couple of, we have backups to the backups to the backups that can send out a message if need be. Sort of answers it, kind of. All right. Anybody else? No. So the department's short and long-term goals for improving campus safety and community relationships. So short-term and long-term goal combined, I would like to be fully and maintain fully staffed. That way I can have officers here. When I came in, we had one sworn officer. Then we became fully staffed and then not fully staffed, and now we're fully staffed again. But that doesn't mean I'm just going to hire an officer just to fill a seat, just to have a warm body. We want officers that align with what we feel the college needs and what the best fit is for our department. I'm not just going to throw somebody in a car with a gun and say, go to work. Because I don't need somebody throwing students down in the hallway because they think they're the best thing since sliced bread. And that's not how we're going to do things. With that said, I mean, I do have one new officer who's not, well, she's new to being an officer. She's been here for a while as my admin. And so she's going through her field training right now. So she's riding around with one of our newest officers, Jeff, doing her training. And when they do that, they're considered one officer because she can't be cut loose on her own until she completes this field training process, which is 12 weeks long. So it's a process and it takes a little bit. Ideally, long term, I would love it if we were considered one of the safest community colleges in the state. I mean, that's ultimately the goal. Our crime rate is very, very low. I have to do the Clery report every year. And I mean, I put zeros in almost every box. We're very, very low on crime, which is great. And that includes here and Transylvania and HSC. So when I say we, I'm including all the campuses.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes, please do.
So, you submit those Clery reports. Do you see what those reports look like for other schools? Is there like info sharing across the Great 58?
If I go and look,
Okay.
we don't share it with each other. But I mean, you can go to their website and find it. They have to. So
I'm curious about like what kinds of crimes typically, I mean, I have a guess, but like what kinds of crimes typically are happening at community colleges?
it's demographic and location specific
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
sure. I mean, community college in the middle of Charlotte's going to have more crime than,
Sure.
us, for instance.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we just don't have the amount of people they do for one. And Charlotte just has a higher crime rate. Same with Raleigh,
Sure.
Any of those big cities. So I'm sure there's more in some places and less in others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I'm just thinking out loud. So I'm just guessing that like our crime rate at the college probably mirrors the crime rate of our county or our local area or maybe the town. Is that fair to assume or no?
Much less.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
It's different. We don't have the assaults, the robberies, all that stuff, which are statistics of Clery, and that's actually how Clery came to be, was a murder of a student. But we'll have some larcenies where people take something and it's like slap them on the hand, don't do that again, kind of thing. But we don't have the major big crimes, and I hope we never do, honestly. I mean, I don't say that lightheartedly. I hope we never do. I hope no one's ever a victim, but as far as that goes, our statistics are very low.
We've got a question in the chat, Chief.
Yeah.
Do we have security cameras in the parking lots around campus? There was a hit and run apparently in Sync that Kirby's referring to. So yeah, can you talk about security cameras?
I have cameras everywhere. So maybe, do you have a specific parking lot in mind?
I'm waiting to see if Kirby adds anything to the chat.
Or if she wants, or unmute and ask either one.
Yeah, you're welcome to whatever, Kirby. I don't know if it's maybe even just around Sync. Do we have cameras in this?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, it was the shared parking lot between Sink and the Innovative High School. That's
Okay.
where, and it was like a side swipe on a car. You could see the paint transfer. It
Mhm.
was actually one of my coworkers that got hit.
Did they report it?
I'm not sure if it was reported or not.
Well, that would be the other big thing. If we don't know about it, we can't go look, but there are cameras in the parking lots. Now
Okay,
we do have blind spots, just like any other camera system would, but we do have cameras in almost every parking lot.
okay. So if that happens again, we just need to file an incident report. You can pull the footage and see if we can get like a tag or something.
Yeah, I mean, we need to investigate that because especially if it's a hit and run, we have other resources that we can pull to try to figure out who did it
Okay,
and
perfect.
then
Thank you.
go have a fun conversation with them.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, and can I interject something, Chris? And you're probably or Chief White, sorry. You'll probably know what I'm gonna say, like, but some of our cameras, I think, could use upgrades at this point just because of, like, we couldn't see a lot of stuff that happened with that one incident at HSC.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say this as the best PC way I can. Some of the cameras at HSC were not attended to appropriately. And so we're working on getting that fixed. Is that a PC way to answer that question? Okay. I've been addressing those cameras for, let's say, a year or better, maybe even longer. And maybe now I'll get some headway on it. So I'm working on them. But it involves other departments that have to be involved because we don't physically control the cameras. If that makes sense.
I think so. Thanks.
Anything else on that one? Nope. Okay. How does the department prioritize resources between proactive safety education and reactive emergency response? First and foremost for us is the training that we have. We have a lot of training and it's ongoing. Let's see, not only we talk a bit about I'm going to say active assailants, not just active shooters, because it's not always a shooter. We do a lot of training on that, but we also do a lot of training on de-escalation and de-escalation techniques to be ready. And that's kind of our proactive safety for us and everybody else, is try to talk somebody out of doing something before it gets any worse. We've got, over 120 years of law enforcement between us. So we've gotten pretty good at talking to people. We're not experts in psychology or mental illness or mental health, but sometimes we get put in a situation where we have to wear that hat the best we can. But the good thing is we work really well with student services and with HR of finding resources that we can point somebody to. And, even if it's just giving Kirsten a call or Julie a call and saying, hey, I have this person who has no food. What do y'all have that we can help this person with? And a lot of times that's the root of some of the causes. For instance, I had a hit and run that I actually worked, and called the young student, said, hey, I need you to come back. You left, did some damage, and I don't want to take you to jail. So come back, let's talk about this. They came back, and long story short, diving into it, it ended up being a money affordability problem, couldn't afford food, all this kind of thing. So it turned out to be that was the reason they left, not because they hit the car. They were afraid of how much it was going to cost them. So a lot of times there's a whole other route to what happened. So that's kind of our proactive way of educating people on, like, I understand you got a problem, but you still can't leave. Like, just call us, we'll figure it out. Reactive emergency response. I mean, we were just talking about the camera system, and the camera systems are generally a reactive tool that we have. None of us sit here and watch these cameras all day long. That's not what we do. So it's a tool for us more so than watching all these cameras. I mean, we have a couple hundred cameras, so there's no way for me to sit here and watch them all day long. Plus, that would drive me crazy. So that's a reactive response for us. Proactively is we do some tabletops with leadership in the event an active shooter were to occur, to kind of try to make it somewhat second nature of the reaction, but it's always going to be chaos. We just try for it to be a little bit more of organized chaos. Is that clear as mud? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious though, when I hear you talk about we have 200 cameras, do you think that letting that information be shared more widely is a proactive step? Like if people know that there are 200 cameras, is that in a way of deterring crime?
I don't think it matters.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you look up at any corner of this building, you're going to see a camera, any buildings. And even with the hit and runs, the larcenies, doing inappropriate things in the parking lots, we'll be like, there's a camera right above you. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay. And I'm like, all right, well, you're on camera, so don't do that. And I mean, it probably would help some, but when people do bad things, they do bad things and they don't care, honestly. And I hate that it's that way, but it is that way. Does that answer
Yeah.
that question?
Yeah, for what it's worth, I'm going to tell people that there are 200 cameras because
That's
I think
fine.
it's, I mean,
Oh.
it's good information for people to have that we're in public and
Yep.
you should expect to be on camera.
Well, and they're in somebody else's house. There's no expectation of privacy in somebody else's house. So
Right, right.
just expect that you're on camera somewhere at some point.
Yeah.
Anything else on that before I go to the next one? Okay. What are some ways campus police are building trust and engagement with students, faculty, and staff? So a representative from the police department, if not the entire police department, is at almost every student event. We try to make it to every single one. My guys walk buildings during the day, during the night. We're limited by the number of officers we have, of how much we can be in there. I'd love to post an officer in each building every day, all day, but I just don't have those resources. I beat it into my guys' heads, not physically, but that they need to be approachable. If somebody has a question, they should be welcome to come up and ask them a question. Even if it's just, hey, how you doing today? And if they're not doing that, then that's something I need to know. Or if they're standoffish, that's something I need to know. So far, I haven't had any complaints. So if there is some, I need to know. The one thing that I try to instill in them is the art of conversation has gone by the wayside in recent years with social media and text messaging and all this other craziness. People have forgotten how to talk to each other. And it's even officers. There's, we'll make somebody go start a conversation with somebody out of the blue. Like, go talk to that person, and they lose their mind. And I'm like, no, leave your cell phone. You can't text them whether they're okay. Go talk to them. So trying to not necessarily force conversations, but students, I'll say hey to students, or how are y'all doing, or whatever, and they won't even look up and be like, fine. And it's like, okay, let's learn to talk, because at some point in your life, it's going to require some conversation. So, I mean, we try, but we can't force them to talk to us. But I want them to be approachable so that if you guys have questions or if any staff have questions or other faculty members, they can feel comfortable coming to them and asking them. And I hope you do. I haven't got any reports that you don't, so.
Well, I've kind of got a follow-up question and also just a shared sentiment that came out of our professional development committee here at the college. There's definitely appreciation for more visibility. So when people see officers walking the halls, they really like that. So as much as you can encourage continued rounding, you know, we don't expect to see a schedule or like on the hour, but that's noteworthy to our instructors. They see that and they appreciate that for sure. And I'm sure our staff do too. I know I do. There was a question that came up in our PD committee earlier today, wanting to know, like, what is it that you need from us? Like, what can faculty and staff do to support your team?
So the big thing is there's not much of, if there's an issue, we don't know until something like this. And then it's like, oh, well, they're not doing this, or we never see them here, or we never see them there. And then it comes up and I'm like, well, how long has this been going on? And they'll say, oh, for months. And I'm like, email me, call me, I'll come to your office, whatever the case is. If there's an issue, let's deal with the issue. I did set a kind of a standard for my guys that they have to walk each building fully from top to bottom, side to side, twice a shift. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in the amount of time it takes to walk some of these buildings, if they just walk straight through looking around, it's an average of 20 or so minutes for each building. So when you factor that in, that's quite a bit of time to do that twice a day or twice a shift, plus patrolling parking lots, plus helping out with anything else, or if we get a call for service or a call to help the county or something like that, it can be consuming. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you factor in everything else, it keeps them busy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and can you clarify, you're talking Patton, Ted, Spearman, like all the buildings?
Yes, all the buildings. And well, we'll say the 7 main buildings, plus you've got the greenhouses, you've got public safety training, you've got all these little outlier places too. The llama farm, when the llama farm wasn't what it is. So
yeah,
because we did have hoarders up in one of those houses one time that we caught them up in there and had to throw them out. So it's not just the main buildings, it's all these other little places too.
Chief,
Yes.
I'm April. I've been at the college and not quite 2 years now, but I just wanted to share my experience being a new faculty member on the college.
Mhm.
I had one officer when I first came and I apologize, I don't remember the name, but came specifically and introduced himself to me, recognized that I was new on campus. And that officer probably came to my office, stopped me in the parking lot, I would say a good 2 times a week for
Mhm.
that first little bit that I was here. And so I really felt welcomed. And it was, you know, at first it was like, you were saying the art of conversation, you know, like we're so busy with our daily roles and our schedule and trying to learn the things we need to do and take care of all the to-do list. And at first it was like, oh, I don't know that I have time to stand here and talk. But it was his presence and it was his invitation. And that was just something that he brought out in
Right.
me to talk. And I certainly appreciated that personality. I wish I remembered his name. I haven't seen him in a long while, but that was an
Probably know who it is.
inviting personality. And I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Good. He's probably not here anymore because I think I know who you're talking about. And
What would the name be?
Tankersley.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's what the name would. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I
So-
felt so welcomed. He helped me feel like a part of this campus. Our roles were totally different, but I wanted to share my experience.
Well, I'm glad that you had a positive experience with that. That's good. I hope that you have that with all my officers. We all have different personalities. Some are a little more reserved than others. Tankersley was very, very much outgoing and outspoken, so he was what he was.
Well,
So,
yeah, Chief White, I want to acknowledge, like you said, some of our officers may be more reserved. And so maybe that's just something that they're going to continue to work on, but you can still be approachable, right? And
Yes.
so us knowing not everybody's going to be as extroverted as another officer, but
yeah,
he'd be hard to match, right? But
on that front, yes.
yeah, but we definitely appreciate your encouragement of them, again, being visible
Mhm.
and smiling and saying hello. If that's all they do, then that's a starting place for a conversation. Yeah.
And like, for instance, heck, just at lunch at the picnic, Officer Kuhn was sitting beside me and a bunch of students came and sat beside us and we said hello to them and they just kind of like looked at us. And we're like, all right, well, enjoy, enjoy your lunch. It's really good. Talk to you later. But it's that kind of thing. It's like we're all in a relaxed environment, laid back. We can talk. We're not the mean popo that are going to lock everybody up. Like, that's not us. And trying to get rid of that stigma is difficult and it takes time.
Yeah.
So
I actually think that we're in a really good position to help with that as faculty and staff, though, because when students see that we engage with you and that we have a relationship with you, that helps them see you in a different way than maybe they would because of the way the uniform can communicate sometimes, right?
Sure.
And so I think that us continuing to work to build a relationship between employee groups, I think that's only going to help our students.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sorry. Give me just 1 second. I got to get somebody to pick up my son. Okay. Yeah, it would definitely help for, faculty and staff too. It's not just faculty to realize like we take off the uniform at night, right? So we're just like you. We have families. We drive cars. We get stopped by the police. Like, things happen, and we're no different. Yes, we wear a badge and a gun and all that for our job, but that doesn't necessarily have to define us. And I mean, Sarah, we've talked tons. I've talked to Lindy tons. I've talked to Julie tons. It's just we don't hit everybody all the time, so sometimes we just don't cross paths very much. And I try to make it a point for my guys to be in and out to at least see them, but it's a fine line between loitering and keeping somebody else from doing their job to carry on a 30-minute conversation, right? I can't have somebody standing out front of sync at the desk talking for 45 minutes when students are trying to come in and get registered for classes and all that stuff. So it's kind of a fine line where I tell them, spend 2, 3, 5 minutes at most talking, chit chatting, and then move on. And just so we don't run into that. Fair enough. Is there any more you guys want on that aspect? Good. Let's see. What's the next one? How's the department adapting its practice to reflect national conversations around policing, especially on open campuses like ours? So the short of it, it doesn't. We have a community policing perspective to what we do. And that is the whole talking to the community, walking around, getting to know each other, noticing when there's changes in student behavior. We run into some students we run into quite a bit, and we get to see their mannerisms. And when something's off, we know it's off. There's been several times where we've had students into our office just to talk. And of course, it's led to some other things of finding resources or whatever. But those are kind of the things that are behind the scenes that nobody sees. And so that anything that's going on well above our heads, it doesn't really affect or change our approach to policing on campus. I know that this is probably a concern, is the new ICE protocols. I have friends in high places, so I will know probably before anybody else when and if that were to occur. I already had that conversation and was basically told, dude, we're not coming here. And if we did, we're not going to come busting into y'all's classrooms. We'll, let you know what's going on. And if we have to bring them out, we'll bring them out. But typically they like to do it off campus on a traffic stop or something like that to not disrupt everybody else. So I'm not overly concerned with that here. Maybe if I lived in Washington or California or something, I might be a little more concerned with that. And being a sanctuary city or something like that, I might be worried, but I'll probably know way ahead of time and we can deal with that before it even becomes an issue. We're an open campus. The big thing with that I run into more often than not is when we get students that apply that might be sex offenders or something along those lines. And then Kirsten and I, and sometimes the president have to have conversations. And while we never want to push students away or turn them away, sometimes our hands are tied. Other times, depending on what they want to do, we can find other resources like taking, you could do some of these curriculum programs completely online. So we kind of try to steer in that direction if we can, or it's basically a case by case. And so stuff like that feeds into that open campus. Anybody is welcome here idea. But sometimes there has to be some restrictions. Any follow-ups on that? Any questions, concerns? Do y'all like that approach? The community policing approach? We look tactical, but they're softies. So talk to them. Tell them what you need.
Yeah, just to bring it back around, the whole motivation for this session, Chief, was because we definitely want, I think the faculty expressed in the PD committee, like they definitely want a community policing approach here, and they see that effort being made and they wanted to find out how we could work to make that even better. Yeah.
Yeah, for us, it's talking and the big thing is breaking that barrier of where, oh my gosh, it's the cops. Like, yeah, but we're here for you guys. Like, we're here to protect, we're here to serve. Yes, I get that. I understand. And we will do that, with our lives, literally, if we had to. But on the other side is we do have a side where we just like to talk to people too and get to know people. And just because we're a badge doesn't mean that you can't. Or if we walk into your room or to your office, doesn't mean anybody's in trouble. We're just saying, hey, just like, Julie would go say, hey, to Kirsten or to Sarah or whoever, we're the same way. We're just employees here. We can work together. Anything else?
No, I don't
Right.
think so. We have a few more questions or notes here that I just want to full disclosure. I shared these with Chief White right before the session, so I'm no expectation that you would have a full answer for any of these, Chief.
Is this the next 4?
Yep.
Okay. So the next one, I'll kind of speed through a couple of these because they're pretty short and there's really not much to them. Sexual assault victim place around here to help individuals. Yes, Safe Light. So Safe Light is located at 317 North Washington Street. And it's not just sexual assault. It's domestic violence, sexual assault, all the things surrounding that. And Safe Light is mostly for women and children. So, but they're a good resource. I can share the number, the address, all that if you want it, or you can pull it up on their website. I think that they have 24/7 answering service. So they've done a lot. It used to be Mainstay if you've been around for a while, and then it changed to Safe Light. So they're really good. I've talked to them, I don't know, 24 times, so they're really helpful. Do you need a bachelor's degree to work in any of those places? I am not sure what that question's asking. Does that mean like for Safe Flight or for these sexual assault places?
Think so. I think that's the question.
I have no idea. I would say it depends on what your role is going to be. You're not going to be able to be a psychologist without a degree or a psychiatrist. So I would say it depends on what you want to do with that. If you want to volunteer, then probably not. That would be something they would have to answer. I wouldn't have any idea. Any more on that side of it? Okay. Any way to provide badge access to HSC before 7 a.m.? Lindy, is this yours? Maybe, maybe not. So
Yes, it's mine, sorry.
that's
Hold on.
okay. I got it from somebody else over there too. So the long and short of it is there's liability with before 7 a.m. with nobody there. So I'm running it up to the higher decision makers than me. And it's in Chad's ballpark right now. I'm waiting on him to have that conversation and get back to me.
If he needs some backstory, tell him he can always call me.
Yeah, I will. I gave him a little bit on what I got from the other person that asked the same question.
Well,
and I don't,
and
yours may be
Rob,
different.
I had sent that out and then she asked me, but yeah,
Okay.
so,
Yeah, is it the same stuff?
yes, exactly.
Okay. So he's aware of some of the reasons why, and I'm sure I'll get called in on that too, and I can talk to him. And then if we need to, I'll call you guys and we can go from there. But I am
perfect.
working on it. It is on my radar, and I'm seeing what I can do.
Gotcha. Well, and it's just from the student's perspective, it's just like his request, and and we do have a lot more student activity there than a normal campus would, just because a lot of times they start clinicals at 7 something. So then they're like, oh, well, I'll just go ahead and study for an hour beforehand. So,
Yep, I get it.
they're a little bit crazy.
Yeah, I totally get the reasoning. But if something were to happen, it would be with the understanding that there's not going to be anybody there to help you if something happens. Like you'll have to call 911 and somebody will have to respond from the city, and we're not going to be readily available to run over there. That would be
No, 100%. Yeah.
kind of the understanding of that. But at the same, that approval is going to come from higher than me. So I'm waiting on that to come down the pipe. Fair.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Chris.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you can follow up, are the hours for student access, like when can students access buildings normally? Or just
So
college?
7 to 10, I think the door's locked.
Okay.
7 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm pretty sure. I think that's the time on this campus. And I think all of them pretty much follow the same path.
Okay. Kirby's got a question.
Employees have at HSC have 24/7 with their
Okay.
badges.
Gotcha. Kirby, go ahead.
Hey, Chief White, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, I got another one for you. So I'm trying to get some more clarification on emergency response. We had a fire drill over in the Sink building. I don't know if it was last week or the week before. And I was a little bit surprised. We were outside standing by the flagpole for probably 10 plus to 15 minutes before Blue Ridge FD showed up. But like this time it was just, I think there were some towels or some smoke upstairs that caused the alarm to go off.
Yeah, it was something in cosmetology.
Yeah, okay. So if it was like, luckily it was not like a fully engulfed fire, but if it were, I'm surprised it's taking that long for us to get response to our buildings.
Yeah.
Any
Yeah.
comments? Or is there any other options?
So how do I put this? So we didn't get a call from the alarm company letting us know that there was a fire alarm until myself and Officer Kuhn were already in the building, clearing the building. So I would just happen to be sitting at my desk, and I have the entrance to Sink pulled up on my camera. And I just happened to see everybody, I caught it out of the corner of my eye of everybody going out the front door. And I was like, what is going on? And I looked up, it's all the lights going. And so I came over there and I don't control the fire department.
Right, I
Um,
know.
So do I wish their response time was better? Yeah, of course I do. Sometimes they delay a little bit because we get over there fast and then can tell them, oh, it's a false alarm. But usually they come and clear the building themselves and then they clear the alarm. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I mean, it's a conversation that I can have with them, but I don't know if it'll change anything, honestly. It's just, that's the fire department's response time. And
Okay, I was just curious. I
Yeah.
appreciate your answer.
yeah, I mean, I know it takes a while, and if we found something when we got there, we would probably push y'all further back. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
If I saw smoke, I would probably have y'all completely get out of the parking lot altogether and go to like the soccer field or something. So that way you just got away from the building altogether. Because we're gonna be there way before the fire department is.
right. Worst like case scenario, if it was something that we needed immediate assistance with rather than waiting on that response time from a fire department, do we have any type of like equipment at the fire training center that we can easily accessible and bring over to a building if needed?
Probably not. Is the equipment there? Maybe. The problem's not the equipment. The problem is somebody to operate the equipment.
Gotcha, okay.
Is the last thing you want somebody uncertified driving a truck over here and ramming into our building or something.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Wish I had a better answer for that, but
You're good. Not a problem. Thank you. And like Sarah and, April mentioned before, I see your officers walking our building all the time and it's very reassuring to know that, we work in a safe environment. So I want to give you kudos to you and your team.
Thank you.
You're all very much appreciated. Thank you.
thank you. I'll pass that along to my guys too. We
Yeah,
appreciate
please.
that.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on that? All right. How many officers do we have and what are their names? So I have 6 total, including myself. I have a couple reserves, but they're not here any amount of time at all. Most have other jobs. So it's myself, Chief White, Lieutenant Pam Cannon, Officer Chris Sellers, Officer Stephen Kuhn, Officer Jeff Banks, and then Officer Riley Ballou. Those are our 6 officers. Riley's been here almost as long as I have. She was my admin for almost 2 years. So,
And she's the officer in who's finishing up training.
yes.
Congratulations to her. That's great.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a change of pace.
Yeah.
Hey, it's okay.
So that
All
kind of that was actually provided alongside the note that you see after that. And I don't know if you want to I don't know
Is
if we
this
want to read that or
Is this the limited presence thing?
yep. So I feel like we've kind of started to address it, but if you want to say anything more.
I guess my question would just be where, is there a particular place for that's a problem? Because like I said, I require them to go through every building twice a shift and I'm pretty strict on that. And if it doesn't happen, they don't like that conversation that we have. So I think for the most part they do, and most are more than that, but minimum twice. I guess to expand on it a little bit, HSC, I've only got one person working over there and they kind of work a split shift of 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sometimes we adjust it depending on the schedule at HSC. I try to cover when most of the students are leaving to ensure that their walk into that dark parking lot and those places is a little safer. it'll make that a little bit easier once Riley completes her training and I have another officer. Then the schedules are gonna change up a little bit. It used to be we would rotate them and have one on days and one on nights over there. And then I lost a couple people, now I'm fully staffed, but one's gotta get through training, so. Schedules are gonna change a little bit in the next few months. And hopefully will help that a little bit. It's never gonna be perfect. In order for it to be, I'd have to have 20 officers, and I don't have the budget for that. And the county's not gonna give me the budget for that. At Transylvania, we have a deputy who is contracted from Transylvania County that works over there, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, whatever he works. So, and I don't have a whole lot of control over that one. That's kind of Glenda's thing over there. I don't mess with Glenda too much. If there is, this is about interaction with officers, would be an emergency, punitive situation, exasperating situation. So, I mean, if there's concerns and relationships need to be built better, then we can work on that. But I mean, we do a lot of stuff around campus too that offer opportunities for interaction, sexual assault awareness training, all the other, I mean, we've done a lot of training stuff across campus. But when I've only got 4 people that sign up for it, it's kind of like, what are we doing? You know, if you want to have a session, you want to talk, but nobody comes, it's kind of a double-edged sword, I think. You know,
Yeah, let me ask you, like, if a department is having a department function, maybe a department meeting or like even a social function, like as we finish up the year,
Mhm.
if that department lets you know about it and invites an officer to stop by to say hello, would you
all the
encourage an
time.
officer to go? Okay,
Absolutely, I would tell them to go.
okay,
It's just like these student events.
right.
You know, they're required to go to all of these.
Mhm.
And unless something drastic is happening where it pulls us away for a law enforcement purpose,
Mhm.
one or all of us is going to be there. It's just like today, myself, Coon, Raylan, my new admin, we were all there today.
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
if you want us there, let us know. We'll come and say,
Mhm.
hey, see how y'all are doing, whatever the case is.
Mhm.
Come speak. If there's some training or some topic y'all want to discuss that's right there and you need some clarity or information or just some guidance, just let me know. I mean, it might not always be me, but the amount of experience, I'm sure some of us have seen something along whatever the question is.
Well, and again, with the relationship building, it really could just be stopping by and waving and saying hello
Sure.
or whatever. Or if we're having a meal, joining us for
Yeah.
that. Okay,
Be happy to.
great.
And on top of that, I think, Sarah, do you remember when I did the open house for the police department?
Yes.
You'll
When-
need to unlock your iPhone
Oh my
first.
gosh.
It's because you said Sarah and they think you're talking to Siri. It
I
happens.
know. What is
Sorry.
going on here? The technology, I'm not good with it.
Yeah.
But like I had the open house at the police department, and out of what 200 and something employees, there was like 20 that came.
Mhm.
I mean, my doors were wide open, come and see and talk, and it was like 20 people.
Mhm.
So while I understand they want effort on our side, it's effort on the other side too.
Sure, of course. Yep. But today was a good step.
I hope so.
Sharing information is a really great way to build that relationship.
Well, and everybody has my email, my phone number.
Yeah,
I mean, whatever you need, just call me, email me, stop by, whatever.
great. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording and